I think I want to make sure that, just going on the same thing that Martin was saying and
Yeah.
deselecting themselves, I want to understand, like, from your perspective, when is the right time to start this? Is it something where it's like a tree, like the best time to plant it is 20 years ago?
Yeah.
Or is it something like, no, like if you're only making $100,000 in your business, uh, as gross revenue,
Yeah.
this isn't really, don't get started in creating a family office
Yeah.
of advisors. What do you feel like is the right time and benchmark to be at to be able to get started?
It's a great question. Before I answer that more specifically, what I want to say up front is it's kind of like working out. Anything is better than nothing to some extent, right? So even if
Yeah.
you just go walk around the block when you're working out, that's better than sitting at your desk and not getting up. So to some extent, there is no wrong time to start this if you're on that path and you really want to do it, right? Don't think, oh, I didn't do this when I was young and so now it's pointless, right? Or I'm at the tail end of my career and so there's no reason to do it. That may not be true. So don't just immediately write it off because of that. In terms of like sort of like when does this make the most sense? I think it kind of depends on what your goals are. To your point, like maybe your gross revenue is 100,000, but your goal is 200,000. Okay, well, how are you going to get to that next level? What is the progress or the progression that it looks like? It isn't always about just sort of like the endpoint. Sometimes having that family office and that support group around you is going to enable you to get to that endpoint or to your goal, right? And maybe faster. Maybe it gets you there in 3 years instead of 5 years. So there isn't necessarily a right or a wrong time. I think when you decide to do it, it's about right sizing it at that moment in time. So maybe you don't go hire the most expensive law firm in town. Maybe you go hire the more reasonably priced law firm in town to help you with that. And then as your complexity increases, as your needs increase, maybe then you migrate to a more sophisticated attorney in that scenario, right? You can sort of like scale up as the support needs to change. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a value in having that attorney available for you early on. Maybe they're just a more generalist and they're not specifically in an industry that, is as niched. So, I think it's a hard one to say like, here's the dollar that it makes sense at, right? But I think I would approach it more from the standpoint of what are you trying to accomplish? And can this help get me there sooner, faster, more reliably? And the answer in most cases is going to be yes, because as humans, we often think we're in more control than we are. And what we fail to sometimes realize is that, oh, well, nothing's like it. IT is a good example of this. We sort of ignore IT in the background. It's like, oh, well, there's no risks. Like nothing has come up. Like it's not doing anything. Like I don't need to really pay attention to it. But what we don't realize is that oftentimes that's what it's intended to do. Like you shouldn't need to have it. You're preemptively preventing a lot of problems from ever getting there. And so that is the other side of this, right? Is that how do you make sure that those issues don't arise that are going to hold you back? So you invest in something that prevents a problem from ever happening, as opposed to having to solve a problem down the road that you've kicked the can.
We're so aligned in our thinking. One thing I'd like to throw out is there are some things that you should do before you even start your business.
100%.
You should do it. Now, you didn't know that, and you've already got a business, but let's take an operating agreement.
Yep.
I've got a client who did his operating agreement on LegalZoom with a partner, and he's about $15,000 into litigation right now because of misunderstanding of who was supposed to put how much money in by when.
Yeah.
So he saved $1,000 on writing a good operating agreement.
Right.
And it's cost him 15, and we're not even seeing the horizon for the end of it. I have another client who didn't seek advice, or could be a CPA or an attorney, and did some things with workers' comp. Had 1099 employees who really weren't, but that's an IRS issue.
Yeah.
Had them pay their own workers' comp. Workers' comp commission here in Oklahoma came out and assessed her a $1,250,000 fine, for which they settled for $43,700. And this is a business with 300,000 of gross revenues. So though she didn't seek advice, she just thought, well, I can probably do that.
Yeah.
And what would it have cost her to call an accountant and say, this is how you have to do it? Right?
Those are great examples. And the The maybe a comparison point is I sometimes think clients or business owners, they don't always want to know the answer that they're going to get from some of these professionals, and so they're hesitant to go get it, right? Because then it kind of puts them on a path they aren't wanting to go down. It's kind of like if you went to the doctor and you had some screening done. You're like, I don't really want to know if I have cancer, so maybe I don't get that test done. But trust me, getting the test done and finding out you have it is way better than finding out you have it down the road when it's not solvable, or the remediation of it is way worse. And I don't mean to say that to make light of cancer in any capacity, more of just that, like, we have this thought that, like, oh, it's not going to happen, or like, it's not going to happen to me, or that I'll just deal with it when it does happen. And it's like, to your point, it is much easier to deal with.
Yeah.
It's much easier to deal with upfront. Now, to your point, sometimes you get past a point, you didn't know that you need to do something. That doesn't mean that you should continue to kick it either. Like, solving a problem never gets easier or better the longer you let it run. It's usually easier to solve once it's identified and be keyed in on. The places that most people tend to get caught up, particularly new businesses, that come back to bite them several years down the road, state and local agencies. So workers' comp, payroll taxes, not being set up in the right jurisdictions, not paying the right agencies. Those are all avoidable things if you worked with a professional up front, either an attorney to get registered in the right places. Sometimes it's as simple as calling the state. And so having your accountant or CPA contact them on your behalf to make sure that stuff is set up correctly. Those are way better solutions than to what you referred to, which is getting down the road and getting a huge tax bill that you now have to mitigate or litigate in some capacity, because you didn't do what you should have done up front, which is consult with a professional and get things set up in the right fashion.
You know, you talk about mindset in your information sheet, and I want to touch on that. But
Please.
one of the things you kind of said, they don't want to know. What I deal with companies that have been around a while and are doing shady things. I mean, shady's a rough word, but they're 1099ing everybody, and they're clearly employees.
Gotcha.
You know, they're taking cash payments and not recording it, and expensing a whole lot of stuff that's not truly a business expense. I look them in the eye and I said, you want to be a damn business or not? Because this is not a business. This is an operation. And you make that decision that I'm going to do things right. And you unwrap the maybe many years that you've been doing it a little less than correctly. And it forces you to do things like pay yourself a commensurate salary. So you're not lying about your business. Pay your guys who are W-2 employees as W-2 employees. Well, it costs me more because now I have to pay overtime. Now I have to pay payroll tax. Well, by God, do it. You will not become a thriving business that can grow and at some point be eligible to be sold. Don't mean you have to sell it or to put into your family foundation or your family office if you do things on the down low. And it forces you, hey, if I'm going to do that, I'm going to have to charge a lot more and become more efficient. Well, that's what you're going to have to do because your monthly nut now includes a $100,000 salary for you that you have to make out instead of occasional draws. That mindset of you need to decide, what am I doing here? Am I really running a business or am I just a guy out there lifestyle, like you talked about, under the table lifestyle? Just don't do it.